What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and I'm bringing you my tournament report for an RCQ I went over this past weekend playing the Izzet Prowess deck. We've been playing it quite a bit on the channel and on our Twitch channel, to where this deck has probably been and felt like one of the most powerful decks I've ever played in the modern format. We've 5-0'd a few leagues with it. We've got a couple of 4-1s as well. Just overall crushing it with the deck, and I decided to build it in paper and take it to the first modern RCQ that I was able to play this season, and it definitely did not disappoint. I'm going to be bringing you my individual matchups, how I sideboarded in the matchups, and of course going over the deck really quickly to kind of get an idea of what we're actually trying to do if you haven't seen really anybody playing this Izzet Prowess deck, but it seems like it's been pretty popular here as of late. And if you want even more information on this deck, of course, I'm going to be going over some of my sideboarding decisions and kind of my thought processes in sideboarding. On top of that, too, I do have a beginner's guide on this deck on my channel that I posted, I believe, last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. So definitely go ahead and check that out if you're interested in more information. And of course, before we get into the tournament breakdown, if you are enjoying the video for whatever reason, you know, you're learning something, or you just generally like my personality content, whatever the case may be, and you want more modern content, standard, all that fun stuff, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. It's also a free, easy way to support me and my content. Of course, leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and if you want even more content, go ahead and check out the description down below. I did mention my Twitch channel here. We do try to stream at least once or twice a week. It's been a little bit crazy in the month of May, so we've kind of took a little bit of time off, but we're hoping to get back to it here in June, so definitely go ahead and throw a follow over on Twitch, as well as joining the Discord server with the link in the description down below. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a rental service for Magic the Gathering Online where you can rent and play whatever decks you want when you want, and honestly, it's a great service. Over 2 different stints, I've been with them for over 5 years, and their rental has been lightning quick. I've had any issues, especially with like card availability, and of course, you get some pretty cool upgrades and pretty cool incentives for, you know, being registered with them for a longer duration of time. There's an easier word for that, but I've, of course, conveniently forgot it when it's most important. But go ahead and use my code in the description down below. You will get 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor to the channel. Now let's go ahead and talk about this Izzet Prowess deck. So real quickly, I'll kind of get in what is going on in this Izzet Prowess deck. And probably no surprise to a lot of you, this Core Steel Cutter is pretty good even in the modern format, as good is probably even better in the modern format as it is in the standard format. So 1 in a red, equipped creature gets +1/+1, and trample and haste. That's not the part that makes it really good. It's the fact that it has this flurry ability. This is when you cast your second spell each turn, you create a 1/1 monk creature token with prowess, and then you may attach this equipment to it. So essentially, it also equips for 1 in a red. So essentially, you're kind of incentivized to double spell. We see this a lot in standard, where you have a lot of people waiting until like turn 3 to play Core Steel Cutter, and then they have, you know, their 3rd land. They end up playing another 1-mana spell. They trigger the Core Steel Cutter, and then the object is to kind of, you know, make sure you trigger Core Steel Cutter or multiple Core Steel Cutters every game or every turn to, of course, just make a 1/1 every single turn. And it's kind of hard for players to kind of keep up with, because even though in modern, like Boseiju is a relatively popular card, and there's also a lot of hate for, you know, specifically like artifacts and stuff from the sideboard, Core Steel Cutter a lot of the times is just a very hard card to deal with, and even if your opponent has answers for it, you're pretty much incentivized to always keep this in your deck, because it is just going to apply a ton of pressure to your opponent and make it very hard to keep the battlefield clear of creatures, when it's just going to essentially make a 1/1 every single turn. We're also playing another broken 1 or 2 mana red creature, or 2 mana red card, and that is Slick Shot Show Off. For 1 in a red, you get a 1/2 flying with haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So you're able to put out, excuse me, English is hard, you're able to put out massive amounts of damage, especially in a format that does have a decent amount of free spells, which we'll get to here in a minute, but you can also plot it for 1 in a red, so you're able to just exile it and then cast it at sorcery speed at any other point during another turn. So this allows you to then play Slick Shot Show Off for free, which can also kind of set up, you know, playing Core Steel Cutter if you're only on like two mana. It seems counterintuitive, but definitely making the extra body is going to be nicer than getting the extra +2 damage from the Slick Shot Show Off. But this is like a way that you can play Core Steel Cutter, and then you just play Slick Shot for free off of plot, and then you're able to get a trigger off the Core Steel Cutter. Of course, even doing it this way too, if you have other free spells that you can play, you're going to be able to get Prowess triggers and you're going to get Slick Shot Show Off triggers. So you cast enough spells, you can make up the damage that you would technically miss out on playing it in the seemingly unintuitive way, but in the way that makes sense here. This card has been absolutely amazing with some of the other cards in the deck. It'll kind of show that Slick Shot Show Off is like one of your ways of just closing out a game super quickly. Moving on, like we have 8 other creatures in the deck. We have Manatraders, Swiftspear, all reliable, 1 red, 1/2 haste with Prowess. This ends up putting out massive amounts of damage. And then, of course, Dragon Rage Channeler is a little bit more, maybe not as consistent, but definitely a card that's going to allow you to smooth out some of your draws. If you're looking for lands, you have a bunch of 1 mana non-creature spells in your deck, you're going to be able to find your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th land very easily in those matchups. It also can eventually become a 3/3 with flying. It has to attack each turn if able, but just being evasive with some of the other threats that we have in the deck is going to be very nice to just be able to chip into your opponent before going all in on one turn and just attacking with a huge board full of tokens and Dragon Rage Channelers. Some of the other free spells that we're kind of talking about, Mishra's Bauble, probably one of the most underrated cards in the modern format. 0 mana, is you sacrifice this artifact, look at the top card of target player's library, draw a card at the beginning of next turn's upkeep. There's so many different bauble tricks that you can do with this. If you have a fetch land and a non-fetch land, you can look at your own card, and if you want to draw that card, you play the non-fetch land, so you can draw that card, or you can play the fetch land, and then you can wait to fetch till after you draw, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of things going on with Bauble, but this is also a card that you can play Core Shield Cutter on turn 2, and then you can play Mishra's Bauble, you can make a token, and of course, end up getting that card back later with Mishra's Bauble. We also have Mutagenic Growth, which is technically a free spell. It's a little bit harder to kind of make work because you're going to want to have a Swiftspear or a Dragon Rage Channeler in play to be able to do this. You can Mutagenic Growth your opponent's own creature, but this is like a card that you can definitely play to just kind of push out tons of damage, and you'll kind of see how here, because it'll end up making sense when we talk about some of the other matchups. Violent Urge is essentially the instant speed Assault Strobe, which for 1 mana, you can give a creature +1/+0 and it gains first strike until end of turn. But if you have Delirium, that creature gains double strike until end of turn. So this is definitely with Dragon Rage Channeler and Mutagenic Growth and Violent Urge kind of being this combo, if you will, where Mutagenic Growth, especially like on a Slick Shot Show Off, and Violent Urge, if they only target the Slick Shot Show Off, I believe that ends up being 16 damage. You end up attacking with an 8/4 Slick Shot Show Off, which a lot of the times is just going to end the game on the spot. Flying is pretty evasive in this format, minus some of the Eldrazi decks that are playing, like Writhing Chrysalis and the other dumb big reach creatures that are just so stupid, and I hate them. They are the bane of my existence, but, c'est la vie. We have Lightning Bolt, 1 mana, deal 3 damage. Really nice, very good removal spell when it needs to be. Also going to the face is really nice. Lava Dart is this spell that is going to essentially be 2 spells in 1. You can pay red, deal 1 damage to any target, and then you flashback, sacrifice a mountain. This is pretty good against Boros Energy because of all their 1 toughness bullshitters. And just being able to flashback by sacrificing a mountain on the turn that you're kind of ready to go all in. It'll help you chip a little bit, maybe get some things out of the way. We actually used this to some success early in the tournament, or actually like late in the tournament, technically, on some Scions to be able to make sure that we could push through our creature and also get a bunch of Prowess triggers, get a bunch of Slick Shot Show Off triggers, trigger Core Shield Cutter, that sort of thing. Preordain is just like a nice setup tool. This allows us to set up those turns where we can play like Slick Shot Show Off for plot on turn 2, and then put enough different types in the graveyard so we can go Slick Shot, Mutagenic, Violent Urge, and then like maybe another spell to guarantee lethal on our opponent. Expressive Iteration is a card that has been kind of like wishy-washy. It either gets cut or it doesn't get cut from a lot of these decks. I just like playing the 4 of these just because you have a lot of other tools where if you need to go fast, like Iteration isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, to like take a turn off. Like there's going to be times where your opponent does kind of outrace you if you are kind of stuck on this like Expressive Iteration plan in certain matchups. But overall, I think I like having Expressive Iteration than not. And then if you end up being in those racing situations post-board, it's easily one of the other cards that you can cut. Mana base, super simple. We have 9 fetch lands total. I had 4 Arid Mesa, full scrolling Tard, and 1 Bloodstained Mire, so that's the fetch lands I played. You've seen other decks that are playing like 3, 3, and 3. It's probably better to play some of the other like Wooded Foothills, just again, mask a little bit of like what you have going on. But I was just very kind of straight up with what was going on. Scalding Tarn, Iron Mesa, Bloodstained Mire. You basically play any of the red fetch lands. That's totally fine. We have 1 Thundering Falls, the blue-red Surveil land, 3 Steam Vents, 3 Mountain, and I played 2 Fiery Islet. I could see cutting maybe an Islet and playing a 10th fetch land if you so choose to. This just being another way to kind of fill the graveyard, just have another land that you can just kind of put in there outside of, Flashback Lava Dart or any other fetch lands or Islet. I don't think it really ever necessarily came up having 2 Islets, but it was just kind of nice to have. So that was something that I preferred. The sideboard, as I kind of shift things over here, we played 4 Consign to Memory. These are for, where are you going, sir? These were for, obviously, the Eldrazi match, colorless matchups, not even really Belcher, I guess. Just depend, like, certain ways that they have of going about it. But I really did like Consign to Memory. I think it's just kind of a must-have card, so we played 4 copies of it. We have 4 Unholy Heat. This is also, I think, another must-have at 4 copies. I brought this in quite a bit over the course of the tournament, and I was never disappointed in it, obviously. 2 Soul Guide Lantern. I wanted to have 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate. I know that, at least the store I went to, I had seen a decent amount of energy kind of running around, so I definitely liked Soul Guide Lantern, plus there were some other, like, weird graveyard decks as well, so I really liked having that. Into the Floodmaw was probably one of the cards I was least impacted by. I had kind of brought this in against something like Boros Energy before to kind of hit any of their, not necessarily Damping Sphere, but the High Noon type effects where you're only going to cast 1 spell or you're going to be able to only cast 1 non-creature spell. This is a deck that a lot of the time can play around a lot of those effects, and you'll find out here later in the video that we kind of did get to play around some of those things. But overall, a card that I wasn't like super impressed with. I could probably see cutting this or just playing 2 other cards on the sideboard. 2 Spell Pierce ended up being awesome, and 1 Meltdown instead of playing the Shattering Spree. I kind of like Meltdown a lot. I could definitely see some situations where Meltdown is going to be pretty awkward considering that you are a Quarry Steel Cutter deck. Thankfully, those situations never really came up, and we were totally fine with just like Meltdown X equals 1 to just sweep up any of the 0 and 1 mana artifacts and play. So that was our deck. I'm going to kind of go over, again, just the individual matchups and kind of how we sideboard, and I'll kind of show it off here so I can probably get rid of this guy and make this a little bit bigger. So the first match we played, get a little bit smaller here, get in here, there we go. So the first match we played, we ended up playing against, it ended up being like an Izzet Asmo deck. I thought it was a Grixis Asmo, but I found out later that my opponent did not have black mana in their deck. We ended up losing game 1. They ended up drawing, I think, 2 Asmos, and they were able just to recur that second or third Asmo 4th time, and it just, from that point on, they just had enough food. They were able to do the Oval Chase Daredevil combo, if you will, where they are able to discard it to Cookbook, and then they make a food token, and then the artifact enters the battlefield. It triggers the Oval Chase Daredevil in the graveyard, so they return it back to their hand, and they just get to make a bunch of food tokens. We couldn't keep the Asmo off the table, and we ended up just kind of conceding at that point just because they were able to make, I think, like 2-3 food a turn, and they already had like 6 or 8 food stockpiled at that point. So just whatever creatures we were playing at that point, we were just never going to come back, no matter how many iterations into iteration plus free spell, whatever the case may be. We were going to have a lot going on, and I think that game at that point took like 20-25 minutes. So it was like, I think 20 minutes at that point, which had to be done. Sideboarding, I ended up kind of going with the idea of being this sort of kind of mid-range deck, and you'll kind of get this a lot, and this is a way that I really like boarding. I took out these 6 cards. I didn't like the fact that they were playing stuff like Galvanic Blast, and not Galvanic Discharge, Galvanic Blast, the Metalcraft, you deal 2, and then if you have Metalcraft, you deal 4. I think Mutagenic Growth, probably better with a lot of these other creatures. I mean, like, you can technically get a Delirious Dragon Rage Channeler outside of Galvanic range with a Mutagenic Growth. I just didn't necessarily like the fact that playing against the deck that had Bolts, Galvanic Discharge, and Asmo, like Asmo sticking was way more detrimental, I think, to the game plan than anything. So we just cut the Mutagenics, cut the Violent Urges, and we ended up bringing in the Unholy Heats. We brought in Soul Guide Lantern, and we ended up bringing in a Meltdown. is how we ended up boarding, and I believe we ended up cutting like a lava dart, basically. Like, this is how we boarded. Lava dart, a lot of the time, I mean, dealing 1 damage to something, being a spell that we can cast twice is really nice. Dealing 2 damage is totally fine, but Asmo has like 3 toughness. There was nothing else that I really wanted to, like, basically darting our opponent's face wasn't really going to be all that great unless we were trying to trigger Quarry Steel or trying to obviously get Prowess triggers. So I think I just valued having the Meltdown and having like the Soul Guide Lanterns for any of the graveyard stuff, and of course Unholy Heats specifically for the Asmo. Now, boarding like this, I was more than fine with it. I just wanted to make sure I had plenty of answers to Asmo as I possibly could, with, having, I would say as much burn, having these lightning bolts and things like that. I probably could be convinced differently on how to board in this sort of matchup, but it honestly worked out. We ended up winning game 2 relatively easily, and turn 3, our opponent actually Damping Sphered us. We never saw Meltdown, but we were able to just play kind of this mid-range game plan that we have talked about in previous videos, where, we just play like Expressive Iteration. We try to go and find like our 3rd land. We end up finding our 3rd land. Then we kind of go and try to find our 4th land. And then we were able to just still double spell in the face of a Damping Sphere with our opponent stuck on 2 lands. And it just ended up working out very nicely for us. We were fine with, playing Slick Shot Show Off and casting 1 mana for Mishra's Bauble, or playing 2 mana for a Quarry Steel Cutter, paying 1 mana for a Mishra's Bauble, or paying 2 mana for a Preordain to kind of get Quarry Steel Cutters and stuff going. So definitely, Damping Sphere was not the end of the world, and is a kind of a recurring theme of players that brought in Damping Sphere, where they were not going to have a good time with that card on the battlefield, and we were going to be only minorly inconvenienced by it. So that's kind of how I boarded for the Asmo matchup, and we ended up taking game 2 and game 3 to start our tournament 1-0, which was very exciting, because game 1 definitely did not go the way that I obviously had hoped it would go. We ended up kind of getting thoroughly shellacked, I would say, in that game. Just again, for not being able to keep Asmo necessarily off the table. We only had lightning bolts in our main deck to deal with it, and we spent like 3 of them, dealing with Asmo. We obviously couldn't find the 4th one, so we had a lot of ways to keep Asmo off the board. Just a combination of drawing Asmos naturally, and of course using future cookbooks to be able to get Asmo back made things very difficult for us. But we move on. We're 1-0, and then our second round matchup is against Hollowvine. Now, Hollowvine is definitely feels like the I'm going to race you kind of thing, and it's just kind of like a shoulder shrug of like, how fast am I going to race you? And my opponent definitely did that, because I believe they were able to put like a Vengevine, a Hollow One, and then they hit for like 4, or they had Mako and the Menace creature, or Flameblade Adept, and then they were able to the Burning Inquiry, that's what it is. And then they were able to, of course, bring back so it was, I think it was just like 4/4 Mako, 4/4 Hollow One, and then Flameblade Adept. And there's just like, it ended up being so much damage. I'm just like, I don't even know if I can actually beat this. And, it turns out that we couldn't. Our hand ended up being doo-doo garbage butter after the Burning Inquiry. So we ended up losing game 1 pretty swiftly, I would say. Game 2 was a little bit grindier here. I brought in, again, kind of the same idea here, minus the Meltdowns. I ended up bringing in these Soul Guide Lanterns, ended up bringing in these Unholy Heats. I don't know if I'm supposed to bring in something like Spell Pierce or Into the Floodmaw. It just didn't seem like it. Maybe better than like Soul Guide Lanterns, but I wanted to stop the the Phoenix from coming back. I wanted to stop the Vengevines from coming back. I think that that's a way that we can kind of get punked out of a lot of games, is if they have a draw where they again, and they're more than likely putting in like a Hollow One and a one of the brutes, or not brute scale, one of the newts or whatever it is, the root wallas. That's what it is. So this isn't going to necessarily stop those things, but at least bringing in the Holy Heats, where if it is a Root Walla and a Hollow One, we can kind of race that versus having Hollow Ones and having Vengevines and Detective Phoenixes put on Hollow Ones, things like that. So I definitely wanted to stop that. Again, like maybe something like Spell Pierce would be okay to try to stop the like the Faithless Lootings, try to stop the Burning Inquiries on like turn 1 or turn 2, which doesn't normally happen. So you have a little bit of time there, maybe the end of the Flood Maws to mess with things. But I think overall I was pretty happy with this configuration, and we got to play a pretty close game. Our opponent ended up having top decking a Phoenix, and they only needed 2 more points of damage. So I don't know if necessarily we were winning that game, but I think we untapped. We did have a little bit more interaction for them, so we were able to kind of keep the board clear on top of just being able to attack for damage. So unfortunate, we ended up going down and losing to Hollowvine, which I kind of chalk up to being a bad matchup if they get to kind of do their Goldfish thing a lot better than we do. I think in that same matchup as well, I ended up cutting the Expressive Iterations. I don't think that that's necessarily a game where we are, so this is like one of the times where we brought in these cards and we actually took out Expressive Iteration, and it was probably another like kind of shave on Dart, shave on Mutagenic, and kind of, or no, I don't think we shaved on Mutagenic. I think we just kind of kept like this race package in, and this is one of those matchups where I kind of wish I had a third Violent Urge to kind of bring in specifically that matchup, or, you know, to be able to race a little bit more effectively. So that sucks. And our third round, we ended up playing against Boros Energy. Boros Energy is supposedly a bad matchup. I hear all the time that this deck is a bad matchup. Now, I've played, I don't know how many leagues with this deck. I have now played against Boros Energy probably 6 or 7 times at this point. I don't think I've lost to Boros Energy, and that wasn't changing here. Granted, our opponent did mulligan to 5, and we mulled a 6 in game 1, so it was just kind of like a, you know, slap box kind of fight. Of course, my mulligan was really nice because we had Dragon Rage Channeler, and, you know, we had a Lava Dart and like Lightning Bolt, so we were able to interact with a lot of what our opponent had going on, especially when they're only doing 1 spell a turn. And we're able to double spell and kind of slowly start to add pressure. I mean, we ended up, you know, playing a Dragon Rage Channeler on turn 1. They played an Ocelot Pride. We're able to dart it and then, you know, surveil and get some more action going. Play another land. They play a Guide of Souls, bolt it, that sort of thing. They just never really got anything going, while we were just able to chip in for 3 every turn with our Dragon Rage Channeler, until eventually we found, you know, I believe it was a Monastery Swift Spear, and we're able to just chunk in for even more damage and get to a point where we can just kind of dump our hand with our opponent tapped out after having to commit something else to the board and drawing lands too late. So sideboard-wise, this is, again, another matchup where Unholy Heat, Soul Guide Lanterns all come in, and these Mutagenic and Violent Urges come out. This definitely does feel like it gets a lot grindier of a game, and I've liked that board plan every time that I've played against the Boros Energy deck, and I did not plan on stopping it then. I've seen other players bring in like Into the Floodmaw for some of the other kind of things going on. I didn't personally feel like I needed it, and this is kind of where I'm looking at Into the Floodmaw on my sideboard. I'm like, do I really want this card here? But, you know, maybe we'll try testing out a little bit more. So game 2 played out a lot like the Boros matchups kind of do, where they played a Damping Sphere on turn 2, and we were just able to outplay the Damping Sphere, basically just not care about it, end up playing our creatures, playing our non-creature spells when we can, and even Expressive Iteration being a little bit worse in the face of a Damping Sphere, because you playing this on turn 3 is still kind of rough, because there's a chance that if you miss on lands and you don't have a third land, that you're not able to actually cast the 0 that you end up putting to your hand. So it does get a little awkward with Damping Sphere and those kind of like taxing type of effects, but it never really came up. Expressive Iteration was still fine. Quarry Steel Cutters, triggers, Slick Shot Show Off, getting in for massive amounts of damage. So it ended up working out pretty nicely, and of course getting to kind of manage their board. They're not able to double spell while we're able to kind of sort of double spell on our turn. Like we're at, you know, we have 4 or 5 lands in play, so we're able to kind of double spell on our turn, get Quarry Steel Cutter triggers, leave up a mana, so then we can Lightning Bolt or Unholy Heat whatever our opponent's creatures, and just overall kind of make it a bad time for our opponent. And we ended up going 2-0 over Boros Energy and continuing our dominance over supposedly one of the deck's worst matchups. Round 4, we ended up playing against Mill, and game 1, our hand was absolutely sick. We ended up keeping both Fiery Islets, and then we had Dragon Rage Channeler, Swift Spear, and we just ended up drawing more creatures with just the right amount of, you know, Lightning Bolts and Mutagenic Growths to just kind of beat our opponent down. They didn't end up drawing black mana. I think they just ended up going like Island Crab, and then they only had the Colorless Land that blows up non-basic lands, Field of Ruin. And life was super easy for us in that game, so we easily take game 1. The sideboarding that we did for this, I think I ended up doing something like Spell Pierce in and taking out some of these like mutagenic growth. I think it ended up being something like this, or it was something like that. We ended up keeping like 61 cards in our deck, and that was, just uncomfortable amount that I was willing to kind of overboard, quote unquote, just to have like an extra card in our deck to for mill purposes. And whether it actually mattered or not, maybe we had to keep like 2 cards in, but I was only playing 18 lands, not like 19 or 20, so I was kind of fine with like registering 1 card over in those game 2 and game 3. Game 2, our opponent had just enough disruption to stop us from winning the game very quickly. They're at 5 life, and then they ended up top decking Tasha's Hideous Laughter to mill like the last like 12 or 15 cards in our library. If you haven't noticed, our converted mana cost is super small in our deck, where we have like 26 1-drops in our deck, 26 1-drops, and 4 zeros and 12 2s. So life gets pretty difficult for us there. So that kind of sucked, but then we just had a super fast kill in game 3. Our opponent didn't really have their mana situation all figured out. I think they mulliganed to 6 in that game, and we ended up beating Mill 2-1. Turns out a deck that ends up putting lava darts in graveyards when you want to cast a bunch of spells ends up being a very nice way to kind of end the game. That was like a game where we had Dragon Reach Channeler and Monastery Swiftspear out early, and then we're just able to cast like a bunch of mutagenic growths and a bunch of burn spells in the hope to kind of hit Delirium and put our opponent away for good, and we ended up getting there 2-1 and moving on to 3-1 in the tournament. Going into the last round, which is a matchup that I absolutely dreaded in Eldrazi Breach. Now, we lost a die roll, so already not good. I have been in this situation before in the previous RCQ season, where I ended up playing the Jeskai Convoke deck, and thinking that maybe I could draw in the last round, only for it to find out like, well, you got to play it and end up losing. So that kind of sucks. But being on the draw against Eldrazi Breach didn't necessarily feel good, but we did end up having a pretty quick start with, I believe, Monastery Swiftspear into Slickshot Show Off to just kind of deal a bunch of damage. We ended up playing Swiftspear, playing Slickshot, and then going like Mutagenic Growth Bauble to deal like, I think that's like 9 damage. It ends up being 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, so 10 damage, and hitting our opponent down to like 8 or 9. And they were super low, and then we got to untap and attack, and end up being able to lightning bolt our opponent's face, putting them to 6. Our opponent fetched to 5, ended up casting a Kozilek's Command for 2 to get rid of our show off and to make 2 1/1s, and then we ended up having a Lava Dart in our hand, so then we're able to dart, and I think we ended up having another spot. I think we had another Mishra's Bauble. Our opponent ended up fetching, was at 6 after Lightning Bolt, fetched to 5, and we got our Monastery Swiftspear up to 5 to, use Dart to kill both the potential blockers that our opponent had to deal exact amount of damage to move on to game 2. Now, this Eldrazi Breach deck isn't like the regular Eldrazi ramp decks. They are looking to literally play the card through the Breach and put in something like an Emrakul or the new Ulamog, whatever the case may be, and just kind of make your life terrible. And by eliminating all your permanents, plus with like some of the other stuff that we have going on here, our life total is going to get pretty low. Being that they were this kind of other version of the deck, I suppose. I did bring in Consign to Memories just because they can just play like this normal kind of game plan. I believe we ended up also bringing in Soul Guide Lanterns. I believe I brought in like 8 cards, and like I thought about bringing in Spell Pierces, but at least to me, didn't feel like that there was enough here to bring in Spell Pierce, especially since we're bringing Consign to Memories, because they are playing a lot of technically colorless spells here, aside from their namesake card. So maybe could have brought in maybe like these, maybe left out the Soul Guide Lanterns, but I also know that they were on. I also knew that they were on the 13 mana Emrakul, so just kind of a lot of things going on here. But overall, I didn't think I want to like overboard too much. I definitely wanted to race, so we ended up cutting these Expressive Iterations. Dart ended up being another card that I wasn't like super excited about, so we ended up cutting some number of these darts. So it might have just been Consign and Into the Floodmaw here was probably what we brought in. I don't think I brought in like too many cards. And Into the Floodmaw might even be a little suspect here because of the 15 mana Emrakul, and the 13 mana Emrakul can actually get hit by this. I guess I was still even thinking that maybe they were going to be on less of like the breach plan and more of just like on this like playing Writhing Chrysalis and whatnot. So just getting rid of, those Eldrazi that I can just kind of bounce, return to their hand, and then end up getting in for a ton of damage or potentially lethal was a lot more beneficial. But it could have just been like Consign, for Consign, and then either like Spell Pierce, Soul Guide Lantern, or into the Floodmaw. Probably leaning more towards Soul Guide and Spell Pierce, but we ended up cutting Iteration and some amount of Lava Darts. Whether that's technically right when you're trying to race, and this is technically 2 spells in 1. Maybe you're supposed to cut like maybe a Swift Spear and like a dart, or a Channeler and a dart. But this is kind of how we boarded, and it ended up working out because the second game played a lot like the first game. We ended up getting out ahead and dealing a ton of damage. Our opponent just kind of spun their tires a little bit. Couldn't find breach. I believe they were trying to set up for it on the next turn. And we were just able to cobble together enough damage through like Quarry Steel Cutter and Slickshot Show Off to end up actually taking the match 2-0 and moving to 4-1 and locking up the 1 seed in the elimination rounds, which was super cool. It felt nice knowing that we were going to be on the play, ideally, for the semifinals and the finals. And it ended up feeling pretty good. To that point, I think we were running pretty hot there. The last few matches, we just ended up having a lot of crazy turn 3s where we weren't necessarily winning the game, but our opponent was at such a low life total that any combination of like lightning bolts, darts, were going to end up finishing off the game. A haste creature plus another like 1 mana spell was going to end up kind of getting there as well. So definitely ended up working out pretty heavily in our favor here. And we ended up going into the Swiss, and we had to play against Broodscale combo, which, as you know, is a deck that ended up winning the Spotlight Series. Congratulations to them for taking down the event. Gruul Broodscale has been kind of a deck that players have been playing for a while. You essentially want to get the namesake card Broodscale into play with a Blade of the Blood Chief on it, and then like you can sacrifice a Scion to make a mana. It's going to put a +1/+1 counter on the Broodscale. The Broodscale says when you put a +1/+1 counter on it, you make a Scion, or a spawn, and then you just keep doing that infinitely. You're going to generate a colorless mana, every single time, and then you're able to play like a big Kozilek's Command to essentially stack your deck however you want it and draw a card. Also technically making a ton of Scions too, to where then you can set up a potential turn where you can like Fleshraker and then make a ton of tokens, or play Fleshraker and then do the thing with Kozilek's Command, or just make a giant Walking Ballista. At that point, when you cast a Kozilek's Command, you can essentially go and find a Walking Ballista, draw it, play it for a bunch, and then shoot your opponent to death. So definitely a pretty interesting matchup. We got to be on the play for it, and we definitely did not disappoint. We ended up coming out pretty quick. I believe we let on Dragon Rage Channeler in that game, going into like turn 2 Slickshot Show Off into like mutagenic Bauble to just, what's that, like 5, 10, 12, 13. We ended up hitting our opponent for like 16, 17 damage or something like that, and putting them to a very low life total. And they ended up rumbling on turn 2, and they weren't technically dead. I believe it must have been like Monastery Swift Spear must have been the other card. But at that point, it was like, okay, well, they flipped over like Vexing Bauble, so they play like main deck Vexing Bauble, which hurts Mutagenic Growth, half of Lava Dart, and Mishra's Bauble, of course, because it counters a spell that didn't have mana spent on it. So it was either that, which I think if they actually took it, I don't think it ended up mattering, but at least in the context of my hand, it did kind of matter because there wasn't like anything that we were going to really be able to play at that point. I think we only had like a land in hand. But they had that, or they had, which I guess at that point, technically, Slick Shot plus any other spell with Swift Spear was ended up being lethal. So it was interesting. They had Blade, or they had the Scion. They ended up taking the Blade, leaving the Scion in play to block, and then we just ended up drawing Lightning Bolt, making life super easy for us to just kind of clean that game up and move on to Game 2. Now, Game 2, I felt like, and this is something different that the player in the top 4 of the event did differently, because they had expressive iterations in their deck. I actually cut iterations. I kept in Unholy Heats. I believe I ended up bringing in the Meltdown and Soul Guide Lanterns. Co-signed to Memory, I'm not sure if Consigned to Memory is that good. Maybe it ends up being like fantastic and I just don't know it, but I didn't actually end up bringing in. I ended up bringing in these cards. I wanted to deal with a lot of the, have the potential to answer like a Vexing Bauble pretty early. Soul Guide Lantern to kind of clean up the graveyard because they were playing the 13 mana Emrakul, and then of course more answers to Broodscale and kind of the other things going on. We ended up cutting iterations. Another situation where we ended up cutting Lava Dart. And I believe ended up maybe it was like a Swift Spear as well. We kind of got rid of there as well to kind of make up some slots to, not get just kind of stonewalled by Scions, just end up bringing in these cards to kind of try to help us out a little bit. But thankfully we had what's the word I'm looking for? We had the ability to, I guess give up a game and try to steal the other one on the play in game 3 if we needed to. And game 2 ended up being really back and forth. Our opponent played a turn 1 Vexing Bauble. We were actually able to play a Quarry Steel Cutter and cast Mishra's Bauble. And I was actually surprised when our opponent said that Mishra's Bauble resolved. I'm like, okay. And then we ended up doing it the next turn. Same thing, like ended up happening again. Oh. And then also in that game, we ended up beating a rather large 11 toughness Writhing Chrysalis and ended up actually clearing our opponent's board, having them to sack their entire board to try to save this Chrysalis, only for it to die to a giant monk that had been Violent Urged. Unfortunately, not with Double Strike, but with First Strike being good enough and also some other damage dealt to it, we were able to deal with the Chrysalis and be put up in a very good position, only for Mishra's Bauble to reveal that there was a... Kozilek's Command on top of their library, and they had like 10, 11 mana in play, so they were just able to make a ton of 0-1s, stack their deck, and we did play for quite a bit longer than I thought we would, but eventually they were able to find the Walking Ballista, make a huge Walking Ballista, and kill us. So unfortunately, that kind of hurt. We felt like we were so close. We felt like we got away with a few things in game 2, but then we had to game 3, where it was much like game 1, where we ended up going just lightning quick. We got on our opponent very early, forced them to make a play where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be able to combo off next turn, so I'm going to hope he can't kill me. And they ended up being at 6 life, so we just showed them 2 lightning bolts after they tapped out, and that was the good games. And moving on to the finals, where we played against Hollowvine, but it wasn't the same Hollowvine player. It ended up being a different Hollowvine player that was actually the 2 seed, which was really cool. Ended up being Affinity in that top 8, or in the top 4. And talked to my Hollowvine opponent, just like, hey, do you want to actually go to the event? Like, what's going on here? And they're like, I kind of want to play it, whatever. So then, like, before we even start playing, whatever, my opponent's like, are you going to be able to actually go to the regional championship? I'm like, I'm definitely going to try to go, whatever. And he's like, I'm not even going to be able to go to begin with. So we ended up shaking hands, playing the game afterwards, and we were so close to winning, so close. But we ended up actually technically losing that game to Hollowvine. So Hollowvine was definitely our Achilles heel the weekend, but got the handshake, ended up, essentially drawing in the finals to get the invite for either the regional championship in Houston or the regional championship in Las Vegas, which was super awesome. Again, like, the deck felt great all weekend. I didn't think that... maybe some of the other decisions, like in hindsight, and I was like, okay, maybe I could have boarded a little bit differently here. This is kind of like my thought process, and I don't know if I've necessarily changed that thought process, but I think I would definitely play around with some of the decisions that I made in playing this deck. But overall, I was super happy with this deck. Quarry Steel Cutter honestly didn't come up as much as I thought it would, in the sense of I didn't really draw Quarry Steel Cutter a whole lot. There was definitely some games where I drew like 2 Quarry Steel Cutters and it was as advertised, great. But a lot of the games came down to just like playing Slick Shot Show Off and actually casting it more so than plotting it, just because there was a lot of situations where it was actually beneficial for me just to play it and then end up getting in like 7-8 damage or whatever the case may be with it, rather than plotting it and then untapping with all of our mana to then just like have a big turn where we're just going to play, 6-7 spells and, 15 our opponent with just 1 Slick Shot Show Off. So it definitely felt like this deck really wants Slick Shot Show Off for like those super fast kills, but in a lot of those other grindy games that we ended up playing, which didn't end up actually going that way, a lot of the time, just because our opponents either got mana screwed and we were able to just kind of like put together our normal kind of clock to end the game very quickly with little resistance. Quarry Steel Cutter did a fantastic job of just making a ton of monk tokens, being super annoying and putting a lot of pressure on the board. I really do like 4 main deck expressive iterations, even in the matchups where they were technically bad. There were a few times where just having this and being able to potentially double spell on a turn ended up being super nice, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I really liked 18 lands. I was cool with 2 islets. I think that this deck was was awesome. I mean, I can't recommend it anymore. I mean, we literally got an invite with it, and my friend Randy ended up taking it to an RCQ the next day and ended up doing the same thing, queuing for the regional championship. So I'm not saying that this deck is busted. I'm not saying that this deck is like automatically going to queue you for the regional championship, but this has been an awesome deck. I think that you get so many free wins just by, you know, having this mode where you're able to play a Slick Shot Show Off, Mutagenic, and Violent Urge to end up dealing a ton of damage on top of just like Swift Spears, Corey Steel Cutter being an amazing card, Expressive Iteration on a lot of spots being fantastic, and of course Mistress Bauble being the honorary most broken card in the format. On sideboard could probably use a little bit of work. I'm going to be playing with this deck a lot here over the next few months to just kind of figure out and nail down a kind of good sideboard. I could see maybe Meltdown not being necessarily the answer, but it seems like if Affinity is going to be a little bit more popular, maybe Meltdown is going to be a little bit better than something like Shattering Spree. But I definitely liked these cards here, except for like the End of the Flood Maw. I didn't really care for this card. I'm probably going to be looking to cut this, but I did really like these 13 cards. This is just these 2 Flood Maws that I didn't like. I don't know what I would necessarily play in their spots. Maybe I would play like another Meltdown or some kind of other like artifact hate card in the place of Into the Flood Maw, or maybe even like a third one as well. I'm not quite sure. It's definitely going to be metagame dependent to me. Like I can see where Into the Flood Maw would be really good and really powerful. It didn't really come up, and I wasn't impressed with it here, and I really wasn't impressed with it in like my leagues and stuff. So it is what it is. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this tournament breakdown. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you all learned a lot about the Izzet Prowess deck. Again, if you want even more information, I did post a beginner's guide on my channel that you can go ahead and check out, as well as checking out all the other links in the description down below for even more content. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.